There is a particular kind of trust that exists between a student and a mentor. It is not like friendship. It is not like love. It is something more vulnerable than either, because it is built on the belief that someone more powerful than you has decided to use that power for your benefit. When that belief is real, it changes everything. A great mentor can lift a person across distances they could never cross alone. When it isn't real, when it was always something else, the fall is so much further than you ever expected, because you climbed so much higher than you knew you could go. My name is Nadia, and the man who mentored me was the most effective predator I have ever encountered. I want to be precise about that word. Not cruel, not careless, not merely self-interested. Predatory, because what he did was systematic, patient, and deliberate. He selected me. He cultivated me. He waited until I had produced something worth taking. And then he took it. This is the story of how I found out, and what it cost to make the truth stick. I came to Westcott University's doctoral program in behavioral economics with one goal: to produce research that mattered. Not research that sat in a journal and gathered citations that no one read. Work that actually changed how people made decisions, how policy was shaped, how products were designed, how risk was communicated to ordinary people who didn't have PhDs. That was the ambition. And the man who told me it was possible, who looked at my application materials and saw something real, was Professor Elliot Marsh. Marsh was a legend in the department. 2 books, hundreds of citations, a TED Talk with 4 million views. He was the kind of academic whose approval could make a career and whose disapproval could end one before it started. He supervised 5 doctoral students at any given time. He chose me as the 6th. When he offered me a position in his lab, I cried in the bathroom of the building where I'd just interviewed. I thought my life had changed. It had, just not in the way I imagined. The first year was everything I'd hoped for. Marsh was brilliant in the way that only people who have spent their entire lives thinking about one thing can be. He could take a half-formed idea and, in one conversation, show me the 3 questions I hadn't thought to ask. He pushed me harder than any professor I'd ever had. He expected precision, and he didn't accept excuses for sloppiness, and I loved him for it. I came in early. I stayed late. I read everything he assigned, and then everything that referenced what he assigned. I kept detailed lab notebooks, dates, methodologies, hypotheses, observations. I was building something. I could feel it. At the end of my first year, I had the skeleton of what would become my dissertation framework, a model for how people evaluate risk when they are emotionally invested in outcomes, original, testable, potentially significant. Marsh read my draft summary over a weekend and sent me back 3 pages of notes. At the bottom, in his distinctive handwriting, "This is the most promising foundational work I've seen from a first-year student in 15 years. Don't waste it." I framed that note. I kept it above my desk for 2 years. I am no longer sure whether it was a compliment or an inventory. By my 2nd year, the framework had become something real. I had run 2 rounds of empirical studies, refined the model based on the results, and written what I genuinely believed was a significant contribution to the field. Marsh agreed. He submitted an abstract on our behalf to the Behavioral Economics Summit, one of the 3 most prestigious conferences in our discipline. The abstract was accepted. The work would be presented. Marsh presented it. I wasn't there. He told me that he'd been approached to give a plenary session and that it made more sense for him to deliver it alone. That it would get more attention with his name as the primary speaker. That it would benefit my career in the long run to have work associated with him at that stage. I believed him, because he had 15 years of credibility and I had 2. Because the logic seemed sound, if self-serving. Because I was 27 years old and I hadn't yet learned that when a more powerful person tells you something will benefit your career, you should ask, benefit whose career exactly? I stayed home. He presented. The talk was received as a significant contribution. The following spring, a paper based on that work appeared in the Journal of Behavioral Decision-Making. Elliot Marsh was listed as sole author. My name appeared in the acknowledgments. 1 line. Between a research assistant named Kyle and the university library system. I told told myself there was an explanation. That's the thing no one tells you about being betrayed by someone you deeply respect. The mind works very hard to protect the belief. Because accepting the betrayal means accepting that your judgment was wrong, that the person you trusted was never who you thought they were. That's not just painful. That is destabilizing in ways that are hard to articulate to people who haven't experienced it. So I went to Marsh. I sat across from him in his office with the printed journal page, and I asked directly, why wasn't I listed as an author? He was calm. Immediately, deliberately calm. He told me that authorship was determined by intellectual contribution at the level of the overall framework, that my role had been instrumental but supportive, that graduate students were routinely acknowledged rather than listed, that this was standard in the field, that I would have my own first authored papers soon. He spoke for 9 minutes without pausing. I know because I checked my phone afterward. By the end of it, I had half convinced myself I was being oversensitive. The other half of me went home and wrote down everything I remembered about that conversation, word for word, in a new notebook I bought specifically for that purpose. I didn't know why I was keeping records yet. I just knew I should. Over the next 14 months, it happened twice more. A methodology paper I'd developed, derived directly from my lab notebooks, which Marsh had access to as my supervisor, appeared in a conference proceedings volume under his name, with 2 of his other graduate students listed as co-authors. Neither of them had worked on that methodology. When I asked them, separately, they said Marsh had told them to expect co-authorship as part of their placement in the lab. They were as confused as I was. The second instance was worse. A grant application, federal funding, significant money, cited a framework whose core architecture was unmistakably mine. The application was submitted by Marsh. The listed lead researcher was Marsh. The budget included a line item for a graduate research assistant. That line item was me, compensated at $15 an hour to work on research I had created. I stopped sleeping well around that time. I spent 6 weeks trying to decide what to do. The calculation was brutal. Marsh had power I didn't have. He sat on the editorial board of 2 journals. He had former students in positions at universities across the country, people whose careers he'd built and who would vouch for him without hesitation. He had decades of goodwill in the field. I was a third-year doctoral student. Without his support, my degree was in jeopardy. Without my degree, 5 years of work ended with nothing. The people most likely to hear my complaint were his colleagues, his friends, his former students. And there was the other thing. The thing that nobody said out loud, but that I understood completely. Women in academic fields, particularly when disputing authorship with senior male faculty, were not always believed. Were often characterized as overestimating their contributions. Were sometimes described as difficult. I knew that narrative existed. I knew it could be used against me. What I didn't know was how quickly Marsh would reach for it. The investigation letter arrived on a Tuesday in October of my 4th year. It was from the university's Office of Research Integrity. The subject, an allegation of academic misconduct against me. The specific claim that I had misrepresented data in my dissertation research and had improperly claimed credit for work that was not my own. The complainant was not named, but there was only one person in my department who had access to both my research and enough institutional credibility to file a complaint that would be taken seriously without immediate scrutiny. Marsh had reported me. He had taken my work. And then, when I had started asking questions, when I had gone to the department ombudsperson 3 weeks earlier, carefully and informally, to ask about authorship standards, he had filed a preemptive strike. If I was under investigation for misconduct, anything I said about him became the complaint of an accused student. The timing was not a coincidence. I sat in my car in the parking garage next to my building and read the letter 3 times. Then I drove to a copy shop, made 6 copies, and rented a storage unit that afternoon. Every document I had, every lab notebook, every email, every draft with my tracked changes, every version history pulled from shared drives, went into that storage unit. I was not going to let him rewrite this. I retained an attorney, an academic employment specialist, on the same day I received the letter. Not because I had money for one, but because I understood with total clarity that I was out of my depth and that the stakes were my entire future. She was the one who told me what I was dealing with: a retaliation filing, a known and documented pattern in academic disputes. The goal was not to successfully prosecute me. The goal was to create enough institutional noise and delay that I would either capitulate, withdraw, or be discredited before my own complaint could move forward. She told me to document everything. I told her I already had. What I had, it turned out, was more than enough. 3 full lab notebooks with dated entries predating every publication and dispute, email threads, forwarded to my personal account at the time of writing, timestamped, showing Marsh reviewing my drafts and offering feedback in the weeks before those drafts appeared under his name. Metadata on shared documents showing creation dates, edit history, and author attribution embedded in the files themselves. A version history from the university's cloud system that showed, document by document, exactly who had written what and when. I also had something Marsh hadn't anticipated. I had the 2 graduate students. Once I explained what had happened to me, carefully, with documentation, both of them came forward with their own accounts. One had been credited on a paper she'd had minor involvement in, while a classmate who had done the core analytical work was buried in the acknowledgments. She had assumed this was normal. She had never questioned it. Looking back now, she realized she'd been used to provide cover. Her name on the paper created the appearance of collaborative authorship while the actual primary contributor was excluded. The other had a similar story, a conference presentation he'd been told to prepare fully, which Marsh then delivered alone, with the students' work cited as preliminary research rather than as the foundation it was. Neither of them had documented anything. They hadn't known they needed to, but their accounts were consistent with mine, and they were willing to provide sworn statements. We filed 3 concurrent complaints, 1 from me, 2 from them, all coordinated through legal counsel. The university's investigation took 7 months. 7 months during which I continued working on my dissertation because stopping would have been conceding. During which Marsh remained on faculty, continued advising students, continued publishing. During which I did not sleep well and lost 12 pounds and called my mother every Sunday and told her it was going well. It was not going well, but it was going. The outcome, when it came, was careful in its language. Institutions do not like admitting that a tenured faculty member has committed fraud, but unambiguous in its substance. The investigation found a pattern of attribution practices inconsistent with university standards and field norms. The misconduct complaint against me was fully dismissed. The grant application was flagged and partially rescinded. 2 of Marsh's recent publications were referred to the relevant journals for review. Marsh was placed on administrative leave pending further review. He resigned 6 weeks later. He has not published since. My dissertation was completed and defended the following spring. At my defense, I had 3 committee members who had followed the case. After the formal quanda, one of them, a woman who had been in this field for 30 years, stayed behind while the others filed out. She said, "I want you to know that what you did took more courage than most people in academia ever have to find. And I want you to know that the field is better for it." I thanked her. I managed to hold it together until I got to the parking lot. I cried for 20 minutes in my car. Not from sadness, from the sheer accumulated weight of years of not being believed, released all at once by 2 sentences from someone who meant them. Here is what I want you to understand about what happened to me. Elliot Marsh was not careless. He was not arrogant in the way of someone who didn't know they were stealing. He knew exactly what he was doing, because he had done it before. The system protected him for years, not through malice, but through deference. Through the unexamined assumption that the powerful person must have contributed more, must know better, must be right. The documentation saved me, not because it was dramatic or damning in any single piece, but because it was complete. It told a story that could not be argued with. Every date, every draft, every message, every version. If I had not kept those records, if I had dismissed the first incident as a misunderstanding and moved on, I would have had nothing. I also want to say this. If you are early in your career in any field, working under someone with power over you, document your work. Not because you expect to be betrayed, but because your contributions are real and real things deserve to be protected. Trust carefully, record everything, and remember that a person's reputation is not the same as their character. The difference is what they do when they think the record won't show it.